The Greeks use the word cause and principle indifferently when speaking of God, whereas the Latin doctors do not use the word cause, but only principle. The reason is because principle is a wider term than cause, as cause is more common than element or principle. For the first term of a thing, as also the first part, is called the principle, but not the cause. And then he goes on further to say, now the wider a term is, the more suitable it is to use as regards to God, because the more special terms are, the more they determine the mode adapted to the creature. Hence this term cause seems to mean diversity of substance and dependence of one from another. See, that's now the language he's using, which is not implied in the word principle. For in all kinds of causes, there is also to be found between the cause and the effect a distance of perfection or of power, whereas we use the term principle even in things which have no such difference, but have only a certain order to each other, as when we say that a point is the principle of a line, or also when we say that the first part of a line is the principle of a line. So he seems to have a problem with using the term cause as opposed to principle, and three of the reasons why is he thinks that cause actually implies a difference in substance, and the second is that he thinks that it implies dependency, which you would agree, and then the third is that he thinks there's a distance of perfection from the cause and the effect. So my question is, obviously it seems like you don't know, which is fine, because I know you're not an expert on Aquinas, and I'm not either, so I'm genuinely asking, because if principle isn't understood in terms of some type of causation or dependency relation, then how is it being utilized? How does it cash out in the metaphysics of Aquinas' system? You know what I mean? Because he's denying any type of dependency because he says that's his concern for using the word cause. But then what is the relationship? That's what I don't really understand.
This is from someone who's an amateur when it comes to mystic sort of metaphysics, but I'm trying to think that the way he would see it is because maybe there is not a numerical distinction between the persons, so he'll only hold to some sort of qualitative or relational distinction between them. So I think using the term cause assumes that there is a numerical distinction between whatever is the relator of that, so the input and the output of that causation relation. So I'm assuming what his understanding must be is because he doesn't see them as being numerically distinct, given divine simplicity. I think for him, principle allows him to have some form of distinction without it entailing a numerical distinction. That's what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. But I would need to go and read more. There's a very good book. What's his name? I think it's Gilbert or Guillory Emery or something like that, which is the Trinitarian Theology of Thomas Aquinas. Yeah. I would point you towards that. So it's published by OUP, so Oxford University Press. Yeah. I think it's Emery, and it's a Trinitarian Theology of Thomas Aquinas. So I think that he'll probably tackle that there. But yeah, generally I don't really look with Aquinas. Like I was saying to you, I take a lot from him. He's a doctor of the church. I'm Catholic, so I respect him and I take a lot of what he's saying. But I think when it comes to Trinitarian theology, he didn't add much above that of the patristics, so the Cappadocians, or if you're taking some parts of Augustine.
Because he seems to be, he's appealing to the Latin fathers and saying, and I don't know if it's true or not, but he's basically saying this is how they conceive of it. He sees himself in that tradition, and to me, that's not my understanding of how even some of the early Latin fathers understood it. It seems clear to me that they did understand it in some type of dependency. And so that's why I struggle to really understand what he means by principle.
I think even there's good work by Louis Ayres on Augustine. And I think, like you were saying, he sort of sees Augustine as being very close to the Cappadocians and the Greeks. More than what's been assumed.
Although on the Filioque, it's
Filioque you have more problems. But I think there is quite a clear sort of pro-Nicene trajectory,
Yeah, I agree.
similarity in understanding what the Trinity is.
Yeah, I agree.
And then later on, you have this sort of divide that comes in and more overemphasis of some elements of it. And
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
I'm interested to ask as well. So, we always had back and forth on the Trinity, monarchy of the Father stuff.
Yeah.
So, are there any specific issues that you have with that monarchical Trinitarian view in particular, or would you say for you you're more accepting of that understanding, not saying obviously affirming its veracity, but saying, if Trinitarianism is correct, that's more the correct view, or do you see issues with it? Or
Depends. You mean from like a historical angle, or from
any angle really? So it could be philosophically, it could be historically that you have an issue. What sort of?
I mean, no. I think it's historically grounded.
Yeah.
I think that it's very clear in 4th and 5th century church fathers, definitely like the Cappadocian fathers, even people like St. Augustine and others. So I think it's clearly there historically. My problem with it obviously is the dependency thing, which is one, which we've talked about a lot. But the other concern is, and I actually did a video on this where I played clips from one of your interviews with Dale Tuggy.
Okay.
And the issue that I see is that I don't think the monarchy of the Father position really solves the problem of tritheism.
Okay.
Because in the end, you do say several times within that interview, unless maybe it was off the cuff and you didn't mean it, but the way you presented it was as such, that in a certain sense there just are 3 gods. So I don't know if you would agree with that or not, because you even went into the whole thing with what's his name, Balcom, and explaining the difference between what was the phrase again? The different types of monotheism, quantitative and qualitative monotheism. In which case, it seems to me, quantitatively, you're saying there's 3 gods, but qualitatively there's one, and depending on how you cash it out, because of some type of relation or whatever. So, to me, that's problematic because it really hasn't. In other words, what sort of work is the monarchy doing if at the end it's still quantitatively polytheism? You see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing for me is just how getting our language corresponding to the metaphysics. And the metaphysics of the matter is saying there is one fundamental entity in all of reality. The structure of reality, that layered structure of reality, there's one thing that's existing at the bottom level. The most fundamental entity, the absolute fundamental entity, I will identify as the Father.
Yeah.
So everything above that level, everything above the level of the Father is a derivative entity, including that of the Son and the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so the semantics of the matter, the language use of the matter is, we use the word God in that hotheos sense, the God, the thing, okay? We refer that term to whatever is at that fundamental structure of reality. And so I'm saying to you, as someone who affirms the monarchy of the Father, is saying the monarchy of the Father cashes that out, because it's saying, well, the one thing is the Father and the Father alone. A sort of, let's say, Bo's use of the word egalitarian, or the conventional understanding of the Trinity would say, no, we put all 3 persons in that fundamental structure. And I think that's when you have the problem. But what I'm saying is that there's only one particular object, one particular substance, which is at that bottom level, which is the Father alone. And that's the same type of monotheism I think all the other monotheistic religions affirm. Obviously, Islam wouldn't use the term maybe person for Allah, that you wouldn't use maybe that terminology, but you would say, if we're counting how many entities there are at that fundamental structure, well, there's only one entity. I think Jews will affirm the same thing. And I'm trying to say to you, Christians affirm that same thing as well. Everything above the Father is derivative. Yet, derivative status and fundamentality is nothing to do with the nature of these individuals. It's the way in which they exist. And so, the Father...
Unlike what Aquinas seemed to suggest.
So, I mean, I'm happy to diverge on Aquinas on this point.
And again, that's just a quote. To be fair, I could be misreading them, but that's in a straightforward sense. That's how it seems.
I mean, I'm happy to diverge on.
No, it's fine.
So it's just saying that What I was trying to say to you is the way in which they exist.
Yeah.
The Father has a way of existing, which is that of being fundamental.
Yeah.
And the Son and the Spirit have a derivative status. Yet they share the same nature in that they exemplify whatever it is to be divine. And so, and that's nothing to do with fundamentality. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the usage of, when we're counting gods, we need to know what we mean by the term God. And I would say the use of the word God is normally reference to the fundamental divine person or divine thing, if you don't want to use the term person. And so the fundamental divine entity within this Trinitarian framework is one thing, the Father. So we are only counting one God, even though you might say we're counting three divine persons. And so I'm trying to push this idea that there's a distinction between Trinitarian, Unitarian, monotheism, polytheism. Monotheism is to do with fundamentality. How many fundamental divine persons? I would say monotheism and Trinitarianism is, well, there's one fundamental divine person, the Father alone. And so Muslims and Christians can share and high five on this matter. But there's only one divine person, if you use the term person as well, the Father and Allah in your worldview. Yet we are Trinitarian because we believe that there is more than one divine entity, which we include the Son and the Spirit. Yet you're Unitarian because you only believe there is only one divine entity as well. And so I don't think the even though I might have used the term God, I think I tried my best in that. Maybe it might not have been that interview, or might be the ones after it, where I brought in that distinction between, the way that we use the word God. Well, I'm happy to say there are three gods. If you're using that term in a synonymous way with divine or divinity, there are three divine persons. I don't think there's any problem with that. Yet there's only one God in the because there's only one fundamental.
In that case, and not without noticing, you're purposely equivocating on the word God. Because there's one God in the sense that there's one fundamental divine person, which is the Father alone. But then, in another sense of the word God, there are three gods in the sense that there are three divine persons. Because typically in English, at least when we're talking about God, to be divine simply is just to have all the properties and qualities that are necessary and sufficient to be God. And so if you have three individuals, each one that have that, then it seems like you have three gods. So again, that's not then to say that we back project that and say there are three fundamental entities. No, there's still one fundamental entity. So there's one God in one sense, but there's three gods in another sense, which me as a Muslim as well as other Muslims would have a concern with that, because you still have three entities which are divine, and there's a certain sense in which you can say, well, quantitatively, it's not monotheistic. Now, if you're referring to only fundamentality, then there's only one of them. But so that's still, to me, is still the concern, because I guess I don't see a significant difference between admitting three fundamental entities and having one fundamental entity, the other two are not fundamental, but also are considered God. That's kind of my worry, is that I don't really see, even coming from a Trinitarian perspective, what would be the necessity of the monarchy of the Father in that sense, because you're still in reality affirming something that the egalitarians would want to. You just think that you add this fundamental quality that the Father alone has. I don't think that it really does enough work to solve what really would be at issue for Muslims.
It might not be sufficient for Muslims, but I think when we're looking about the language use of the term God, I think it's a referential term which is not just fulfilled by something being divine. I think if you look throughout Scripture or you look throughout church history, it wasn't just that this entity is divine that makes it the one God.
I agree. It was much more fluid.
I would say, because if you look at the Old Testament, you look at the New Testament, you look then into, let's say, the first 3 to 4 centuries. Divinity wasn't the issue. It literally wasn't. Because as Borkham, as Larry Hurtado, as other individuals who have looked at Second Temple Judaism, there were loads of individuals that accepted other divine entities. And so and Larry Hurtado is really push this idea that we need to be so clear that within ancient Jewish monotheism, the issue wasn't about divinity, because the Jews accepted many divine entities within their worldview, but that didn't stop them from affirming monotheism. Their understanding of monotheism was that we worship one God, and the reason why we worship one God is because he is the sole creator of all reality, and he is not created by anything else. And so why we don't worship any idol or anything like that is because we weren't created by him, and that thing has created itself. And so the issue then is about fundamentality. The Jewish practice and the belief throughout ecclesiastical history was why we look to the Father and the Father alone, and Jesus himself pointing to and saying this is the one true God, is because of the fundamental aspect that he is the ultimate source of all of reality. And even natural theology points to that. Natural theology doesn't lead us to just a divine entity. Natural theology leads us to a divine entity who is the fundamental thing.
Yeah, we agree on that.
So what I'm saying to you is that not just natural, so you have natural theology, you have scriptural usage, you have ecclesiastical history, where it's actually the term God, the one that's most important, isn't its usage to say that something's divine. It is this entity divine and fundamental? If it is divine and fundamental, then it is the one that we give sole worship to. Because even as a Trinitarian, we worship the Father. Even though we worship Christ, we worship Christ, who is the medium between us and the Father. And so ultimately, everything goes to the Father, because he's the ultimate source of all of reality. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that the monarchy of the Father allows us to ground that understanding that actually the important usage of the word God when it comes to monotheism and polytheism is how many fundamental entities are there within your worldview. If you affirm more than one, then you are polytheistic. If you affirm one, then you are monotheistic. Yet you might not be a Unitarian. So a Unitarian is one who then affirms only one divine entity. So I think that distinction between monotheism, Unitarianism, polytheism, and Trinitarianism needs to be made there. And that's what I'm trying to say to you. The monarchy of the Father allows us to have.
I just think that from an Islamic paradigm, maybe we could say that the understanding of monotheism is stricter, because the way that the Quran defines shirk, which is basically associating partners with God, is not necessarily to say that there's an entity which you're saying is the fundamental layer of reality like the Father. In fact, it quite frequently uses the term God to refer to things that even the individual themselves does not consider to be the fundamental layer of reality. For example, in the Quran, I think it's in chapter 45, verse 23, it mentions quite specifically, have you not seen those who worship their own desires as a god besides Allah? And then says that this is essentially shirk. In the following verse, it tells you what those people say. They say that there's nothing but this worldly life. We live and we die and nothing destroys us but time. Well, what does that sound like? Modern atheism. And so what the Quran is saying, even if you don't say that this being is a fundamental layer of reality, or even use the word God in a lesser sense, not even to refer to the fundamental reality, is still problematic, because you're attributing things that in the Islamic paradigm are due to God alone to other entities that are not fundamental, whether it be your own desires, whether it be Jesus from our perspective, obviously, whether it be Mary because of certain things that we think are too extravagantly applied to her, etc., etc. So the Quran also has a looser meaning of the term God, but in a different sense. It has a wider approach to say that no, strict monotheism is this. It's not only fundamental, but any type of quality, for example, omniscience. If you want to attribute omniscience to another being like the Son or the Holy Spirit, even if you say that they're not fundamental, it's still problematic. So that's why I said, in what aspect did you want to address the question? Because from an Islamic paradigm, theologically speaking, it's still problematic to say that you have these two other things that are divine, even if they're not fundamental, because the Quran sees it as you giving things qualities or attributes that are ascribe to God alone in the fundamental sense to these other beings. Even if it's not fundamentality, could be omniscience, could be omnipotence, whatever. And that itself, Quran deems as problematic. You know, so I'm just saying, I'm not using that as an argument, but I'm saying as
my only
issue.
thing is that with Christianity and with Islam, something that we need to uphold, and I think we really uphold in our worldviews, is that there is a continuity with what came before Christianity and Islam. Obviously, Islam would say it's been here since the beginning, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, say it came around, the 6th century. And so you have Islam, you have Christianity. What is always upheld in both of these worldviews is continuity with Judaism. And so what happens a lot of the time when I do speak to Muslims is that Christians have walked away from the monotheism of the past. Let's say you find it within the Jewish paradigm. And what I'm trying to say to you is that maybe there was a more tightening of the understanding of monotheism when it came to the Islamic worldview. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there is a continuity between Christianity and Judaism. And so even if there is a divergence when it comes to Christianity and Islam, that is not problematic. There will be a problem if you were to point to me and say, well, Jews understood monotheism in this specific sense, and not just obviously saying ancient Judaism, but let's even say Second Temple Judaism, so the time of Jesus, the immediate followers of Jesus understood monotheism in this specific sense, and Christians have moved away, then that will be a problem. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there's a continuity between Judaism and Christianity in affirming monotheism. And so maybe there's a difference when it comes to Islam, but then Islam has a problem then, if that's the case, because continuity of belief needs to be there. If you are saying that this religion has been here since the beginning, and it's the religion that we find in Judaism, maybe corruption came in, but it's the same nucleus there, it's the same religion that is then explicated fullest at the time of Prophet Muhammad, then you must have continuity and connectedness of belief. But if there's a breaking of that, and I'm saying there's a breaking of that when it comes to monotheism, then there's a problem there in claiming continuity and connectedness of belief. Christians don't have that, because we're trying to say, actually, in Second Temple Judaism, this is the understanding of monotheism that Christians have upholding all the way up to Nicaea.
Yeah, but what about before that? Do you think that the Jews always believed that, and can that be demonstrated historically?
Yes.
I don't think that.
Well, I would say to you.
Would you make that strong of a claim?
Oh wait, are you saying Trinitarianism itself?
No. I'm saying
the understanding of monotheism. Yeah.
The understanding of monotheism, in the sense that it's problematic to associate things with God, not just in the nominal sense of using the word God, because we see that in the Old Testament with Moses, for example, is made a god to Pharaoh, Elohim, and things like that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, in the sense that there were Jews that believed in the monarchy of the Father, and that didn't believe in the existence of the Son and Spirit, and would use the term God loosely and fluidly to refer to other beings, but never understood that those other beings were equal to the Father.
Okay. So, obviously prior to the time of Christ, there wasn't that maybe clear explicated understanding of there being two other divine persons. But what I'm trying to say to you is that for the whole point of what I'm trying to explain is that monotheism wasn't to do with divinity. That's what I'm really trying to emphasize here. And so if there was more than one
but was that universally held by the Jews?
I would say it's been quite clearly shown by quite a few scholars. I think a clear one is Michael Heiser. He is a Christian, but he's done phenomenal work on the Old Testament and the understanding of monotheism in the Old Testament. And so sort of this idea of the divine council.
I'm familiar with all that material, but I'm saying, is there descending or opinions that are scholarly that disagree with those theories, in the sense that that's not, although that may have been held by some Jews, doesn't mean that it was universal.
Oh yes, of course. In any field, you can always find scholars disagreeing on stuff. But you go with what's the majority, and also who's the most reputable in the field, who people are then being most influenced by in their sort of scholarly work. And I think a lot of people would look to individuals who have been tackling this issue. So, for example, Larry Hurtado, I think he's played a massive role in sort of ancient Jewish monotheism, understanding what that is. And he has shown clearly in his work that, and even Richard Borkham himself, even though he's a Christian, I think a lot of scholars looked at his work as being very, very influential. Even Hurtado himself pointed to Dworkin prior to his death. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not saying all this stuff is nonsense.
So I'm saying to you that obviously you'll have divergence of opinion in any field, but a number of reputable scholars would say actually monotheism, correctly understood, was to do with worship practice, and the idea that actually we worship the one God, the Father, and we don't worship any other deity, we don't sacrifice to any other deity, and that's what grounded monotheism. Yet belief in more than one deity wasn't a problem. So Hurtado really is emphasizing that idea. He even says we shouldn't, well, not him actually, sorry, other scholars have said we shouldn't use the word monotheism anymore because it's just not helpful. Because monotheism now has come to the idea that there is a belief in one God, belief in one deity. But actually ancient Jewish monotheism, which Hurtado is really emphasizing, is worship practice. We worship and sacrifice to the one God alone, and that's what makes us monotheistic. Even though we might believe in a plurality of other divine entities within our worldview, that doesn't stop us from being monotheistic. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that there is an emphasis here that there is a categorical distinction between the one God, who we would call the Father, and there being other divine entities. And so what I'm trying to say to you is, with contemporary speech taken from metaphysics, fundamentality is that categorical distinction. He is the fundamental entity because he's unsourced and is the source of all reality. Yet there can be other divine entities that share his qualities, yet they're non-fundamental because they are grounded or come from him in some specific sense. That word.
So let me be clear. The Muslim position would be, even if we couldn't find a single trace of evidence of the Islamic conception, we would still believe in it. So the historical account for us, although we'll look at what the evidence is, lack of evidence, even if I granted it for the sake of argument, which I'm not, let's say there's absolutely no evidence, Muslims would still believe in it because we believe that our faith is justified by other prior considerations, by the Quran itself, by the prophethood of Muhammad, etc. And so because of that, even if we couldn't, let's say for sake of argument, we could not find within the Jewish tradition any semblance of the Islamic conception of God, in that you didn't have these other lesser divine beings who were accepted, and it was sort of this not strict monotheistic religion in the way that Muslims conceive of it, still wouldn't be a problem for us in that way. Now, you may look at that as problematic, and maybe some other people would as well. But for me personally, and I don't think Muslims in general either would disagree with this, that our position on this does not rest on a historical analysis of what is going on in contemporary scholarship based on this. See what I'm saying?
Larry Hurtado's.
I know who he is.
He's dead now.
He what?
He passed away maybe 2 years ago.
He doesn't state. He says there are multiplicity of gods that were believed, but they were never equivocated to being one divine Almighty God.
That's his position.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what he's saying.
But you're a monarchical.
But I mean that's what I was affirming.
So what I'm saying is, it's not an argument. I'm just trying to get you to understand from our point of view that for us it doesn't really matter, because there are many things that we can't establish historically, but we believe in them based on prior conditions that we have good reason to believe that the religion is true. And there are things like that in Christianity or Judaism as well. Now, basically the question is, well, should we actually find that information? Well, I see numerous examples in the Quran, and this has always been the Quranic narrative, is that people go astray very easily. For example, we have the example of Moses and Aaron in the Quran, in which the Quran addresses them as two messengers who existed and were brothers at the same time. And the Jews actually started worshiping a golden calf while they were around. Moses left for a brief period and they started worshiping the golden calf when Aaron was alone, and Moses came back and he was so annoyed at what happened in a short amount of time. So for us, it's conceivable, and it's not at all out of the realm of possibility that simply that narrative was there, and that belief was there, and that people have gone astray. And this is the Islamic position. So for me, and I think Muslims in general, I don't think that they're going to be bothered too much by this historical analysis of what the Jews supposedly believed.
But I would say, I do believe that there's a problem that needs to be wrestled with. Even though, I mean, Muslims might not see it as problematic, there is a problem there that I think should be taken into account. And it's basically the idea that there's a positive claim made by Muslims that there is a continuity of belief in Islam. So Islam is not just a new religion that just showed up when Prophet Muhammad was around.
Yeah.
But it's always been there. Maybe there was corruption and problems, but it's always been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
It was expressed in Judaism. There was corruption, but it was expressed.
Yeah.
It was expressed in the religion of Jesus, but there was maybe corruption and it became Christianity and blah, blah, blah. It's always been there. But then if there's a positive claim made, then there should be evidence in favor of that positive claim. Because
Well, not necessarily. That's what I'm disputing.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say to you is that there's a good way to sort of think about this idea is that, and I used the terms before, but if we hold to a body, an organization being, an organization that's been there from the beginning, then at each point of its existence, there should be continuity and connectedness between that present body and the previous bodies. So, for example, if I have a company that I start up and I say, hey guys, I'm called McDonald's. But then I'm selling some sneakers. I'm selling American. I'm selling some trainers and I'm selling clothing. But I call myself McDonald's. And I've never even worked at McDonald's, I've just started McDonald's. Are you going to call me McDonald's that we've known and we've always, been brought up with, that we've eaten from? You're not going to call me the same company. The reason being is because there's not connectedness in practice and continuity in practice, and also in organization because I was never involved. But let's say the CEO of McDonald's, the guy in charge, said, you know what, we're going to actually diversify our business because we need a little bit of money, so we're going to start off a clothing company now. We're still called McDonald's, but we're going to also have a bit of our restaurant where you can go and buy some clothing. And let's say, I send off a manager to start that up. Is that McDonald's that I'm going to where they're selling clothing going to be the same McDonald's? It would be. The reason being is because there's continuity, because you're still maybe selling some burgers whilst you're selling some clothing, but there's also continuity in organization because the CEO was the person who started that. Now, the whole point of saying all of this example was Islam is claiming to be a body that has connected, that is not something that just came about, that has always been there. So then with the previous bodies, there should be continuity and connectedness between them. Now, what I'm trying to say to you is with the central belief in Islam, which is the belief in God, and monotheism, and the central belief in Judaism, which is the belief in God and monotheism, as we see in the Shema, and even in Christianity, the central belief is in monotheism, as Jesus said, we should affirm that there's only one God. So monotheism is a key belief. Now, what I'm trying to say to you is, if there is a discontinuity between Islamic monotheism and Judaic monotheism, then you cannot claim continuity and connectedness between the body, whatever it is Judaism is, and Islam. You have to call Islam a new religion. You cannot claim it to be a religion that's always been there, because there is a discontinuity.
But the point is, you're claiming there's a discontinuity based on lack of evidence or lack of historical evidence to support the claim. And my point is that just because they're supposed, which I'm not even granting, because honestly I have to research it much more in depth. But let's say for the sake of argument there's just no evidence whatsoever. Well, there's many things that even Christians believe in that there's absolutely no historical evidence for whatsoever. So I, as a Muslim, don't have to prove every link in the chain that goes from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, all the way back to Prophet Adam and show that there's a historical link at every point in the chain. I don't think that I need to do that. Now, you're saying, well, maybe that's true. I don't know if you're going to disagree. But specifically on the point of monotheism, you're saying, well, maybe it's a stronger necessity that we need to somehow find that evidence. I don't see it that way.
But what I'm trying to say to you is that I would agree with you. I'm not saying there has to be evidence for every link in the chain. But what I'm saying to you is that there is positive evidence, which again, you said you want to go and look at. And I think it's, don't just take my word for it. but there's positive evidence that monotheism was a little bit looser than
I agree with that.
Yeah, than what Islam is saying.
Yeah, I agree with that, but there's also claims that monotheism has sprung out of polytheism. I mean, that's the standard narrative. Do you accept that?
I mean, so again, I'm leaning a lot on Hurtado, but people like Hurtado would say that narrative is incorrect. So it's a narrative.
I know, but I'm saying that's pretty mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, it's a narrative that was pushed, and some people have looked at it. Might be James McGrath who's also defended it. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's a narrative. But again, I think some scholars have shown that there isn't good reason to believe that. But that aside, anyway, I'm
just saying it's a historical issue because if we're taking this scholarship seriously, then that also would be a problem for both Judaism and Christianity, because the narrative is that monotheism was born out of polytheism, and that's been the standard narrative for quite some time. I agree that, as you said, there's always going to be people that push back on it, and just like that, I would push back on that as well. But in the same token, if I found absolutely no evidence of that claim, I still would be a Muslim.
Yeah.
So that's my point.
But my only thing is that, I'm not saying about you, but consistency in analysis should be, if we're going to utilize the framework of history to understand which religion is
I don't primarily do that.
I'm not saying maybe you do, so I'm not trying to straw man your position and say this is what you're doing. But I'm saying generally what I understand is that the only way to literally, because I don't think, and I really do believe, I don't think there's any logical incoherence in the understanding of the Trinity within the monarchical picture. So, because someone could say, well, there is a philosophical problem, that's why we're led to Islam and we don't go to Christianity, because there's a logical incoherence. I don't believe there's a logical incoherence there that can be derived in the monarchical view. I do believe in some egalitarian views there is a logical contradiction, but I don't believe that's to be had with the equivocation strategy that's given by...
So if a Trinitarian believed in three fundamental entities, would you say that was incoherent?
No, not necessarily. It'll be incoherent if applying that to the Trinity would be.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, why that will be so is, well, it depends actually how you cash out fundamentality. But let's say you go with fundamentality is relative to grounding, and you say that each of the Son and the Spirit are grounded by the Father, but yet they're fundamental, then that'll be a problem, because to be fundamental is to be ungrounded. And so you'll say there's three ungrounded and two grounded entities, which is...
What if they're all ungrounded?
Then you can't hold to the procession relations unless you identify that differently. So unless you say there is a causation relation and they're relative to fundamentality relative to grounding, they're ungrounded.
I'm saying if they reject the procession relations and say there are three fundamental entities within the Trinity,
that's not incoherent.
Huh?
No, that's not incoherent.
Yeah. So, but then at the same time say that there's only one God. Well, if you're saying that God is understood in terms of fundamental, and there's three that are fundamental,
I agree with you. Yeah, that'll be a problem. That'll be a problem. If you're using the term God to refer to the idea that there is only one fundamental entity, yet you affirm three fundamental entities, then that will be an incoherence. But I would say the monarchical picture doesn't say that.
I know that. I'm just saying.
So I'm saying the whole point of what I was saying was, I don't believe philosophy can lead you to Islam over Christianity and
well, obviously I disagree.
You'll disagree, but just from my position, I believe it's the historical work that you have to do to be able to diversify. Okay, I mean,
I disagree with
unless
that.
you can bring specific ones that you...
Yeah, so actually I want to talk about something, because let me check the time. I've only got maybe 10 more minutes.
No, that's fine.
I actually have to go teach a class.
That's fine.
So,
it's good being able to speak.
Maybe about 20 more minutes I can push it. So, there's two other, because I'm not trying to run from this conversation, but I think we've kind of exhausted that point. I want to get to one or two other things. So, the other thing is that on this philosophical point, do you think that the Trinity can be arrived at or established by philosophical argumentation in a way that you say that the Trinity is necessary, that we must rationally accept the Trinity itself? I know that you've kind of argued for that, but what I wanted to ask you because as a Catholic, I think it's problematic, because to me, the Catholic Church seems to say that the Trinity itself is a mystery, in the sense that, and I'm happy to be corrected, but I've had many Catholics actually tell me this, that we can't actually argue for the necessity of the Trinity based on philosophy or reason alone, because it's actually a dogma of the Church to say that the Trinity is a mystery. And when I use the term mystery, I mean it in the biblical sense and how the Church understands it, in the sense that it's a doctrine which was formerly unknown, which was later came to be known. It's something that is revealed. It's a revealed doctrine that is not known through reason alone.
Yeah.
And in fact, I know you disagreed with Aquinas earlier, and that's fine, but Aquinas actually quite strongly says not only can the Trinity not be established by reason alone, but anyone who thinks that they can is actually degrading the faith and going against the faith. He makes pretty strong claims about it. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So I agree that it can't be by reason alone. But in one of my articles so where I try and formulate a new love argument that I believe isn't subject to this problem and other problems that are being raised by against Swinburne's one. I believe that the Trinity can be derived from, it can come from reason and revelation. So the problem is, I don't believe it can come from reason alone. But it can come from revelation, and then from something being revealed
to back it up.
No. So in the it's a long and boring paper, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty. But I in that paper, I'm arguing that the idea of love, that there is a certain form of love that's revealed in Scripture, and I am open to even say other religions will affirm this to be revealed, that there is love is revealed, or a certain type of love is agapeic love. So agapeic love is a love that is revealed in Scripture, and so from God revealing agapeic love, we can then derive the Trinity from that conception of love.